very good afternoon. So now is the time for maybe you are feeling too tired, but so let's see that another panel today. So welcome you to our sessions now. So here today is we recognize that so development needs to be approached holistically, and so that the landscape approach is key in reaching climate resilience, mitigations, and extreme restoration goals. So while we understand that to reach these goals to requires a new way of looking at land use and of doing business, that namely that this is a transformational change. But we need to better understand what is this. So that is the one main objective of today's panel discussions. So, and before doing that, I'll just show you some examples. One of the case of the Kenya, so a young girl, Damiana, who undertook only a few months of agriculture training, and she told me that she was almost certain she wanted to become a farmer. So Damiana's primary schools is an example of implementing change through the sharing the knowledge and techniques needed to ensuring local food productions. So this illustrates is a bottom-up approach and also small but important transformation change. So, but the change of scale is quite important also. We need more knowledge, information, and research to understand that opportunities and bottleneck for achieving transformation at all levels. Another example is, so we observe that deforestation is not an inevitable result of increased agricultural growth. So our FAO is one of the flagship report, State of the World for Today's our panel will focus on that ways in which transformation change can be achieved across multiple sectors, including forestry, agriculture, and also lessons learned from sectors such as health, education, management, and public administrations. Before we proceed, the panel also allow me to make a few points. So first one is, FAO recognizes immense importance which partnerships so play in accelerating transformation change on their path toward achieving of the Agenda 2030s and SDGs goals. No one will deliver this alone. Even today's morning session, in the several times, participants and panelists pointed out the importance of partnerships. And the second point is scaling up. The question on how to finance transformation change become critical for our discussions. An example can be seen in our community market for conservation project in Zambia, so which takes a market-oriented approach to reducing carbon emissions in partnership with chief dams in Eastern Province. Revenue from carbon credit is invested into community development and social enterprise project So this community project is focusing on the root causes of poverty and the food insecurities and build resilience. This is quite a great example, and we need to find ways to scale up such initiatives. And the third point is on research needs. So further research is needed to offer further guidance on defining and measuring transformational change, as well as a better understanding of the financial, human, and institutional resources. Our key element is a non-linear ways of thinking focusing on local collective level learning, and trial and errors with innovations and flexibilities. So FAO looks forward to continuing this work together with CFOs and partners and the key experts. So I think now is quite a good discussion now on. So just we're waiting that is a quite a meaningful discussion at the same time. It's some of our interaction between the panelists and also audience. Thank you very much.
And now to continue the plenary that is hosted by C4, FAO, and the Green Climate Fund, I invite our moderator, Dr. Stephen Leonard, who's a climate change policy analyst at C4.
Good afternoon. I might just welcome the panelists just to come straight up here, just in the interest of time. So this panel will be an exciting group. Green Climate Fund representation, C4, FAO, civil society, and IGES, a government research agency here in Japan. So if you'd like to take a seat wherever in any order, it's fine. So many thanks to Mr. Mitsugi for your introduction to the session, and many thanks also to the Global Landscapes Forum for being prepared to host this discussion today. This topic of transformational change is something that we've been now looking at as a collaboration between C4 and the FAO, also together with the Green Climate Fund and a number of other different stakeholders, and it's been a very interesting journey, and it's a very important one as well, we think, because we're in a circumstance at the moment when it comes to climate change where there's a dire urgency, both in the context of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. There's been a stern word of warning that's come from the IPCC recently in the 1.5 report, and the concept of transformational change is something that's coming up more and more when it comes to different approaches that are being taken both at a national level and also within the UN system. We see what they're calling different transformative initiatives out of the UN Secretary General's Summit on Climate Change is coming up later this year as well. So understanding what this actually means in a broader context and when it comes to land use and landscapes is something that we consider to be extremely important at the moment, and so we are prioritising and working hard to try to start to build a coalition of different organisations and individuals who are looking at this issue. There's some research that has been underway that you'll hear from today as well on the panel from our first speaker, and so we're working hard to be building the knowledge base to contribute to the conversation on understanding transformational change. So I'll move on at this point to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Atmaja Stibniati, who is a fantastic scientist and a colleague, and I'd probably consider a friend by now, after we've been working more closely together recently at C4. And so Nia has been leading the report and the research that has been undertaken as a part of this project. And so, Nia, if you'd like to perhaps just provide some insights that you have identified through the work that you've been doing, most specifically around definitions and looking at transformational change and the way that it's being approached and the way that it's being defined by the different institutions that are using this terminology. Thanks.
This is on? Yes, okay. Hi, Steve, thanks for considering me a friend. Okay, my name is Nia Stibniati Atmaja, and I undertook a literature review on what is transformational change. Now, many of you, and including myself, may have not heard of this term for very long, and so my interest was to understand how others understand it, how people define it, because if people are talking the same word, but actually meaning different things, then it is hard to align our forces in a complementary and coherent way. And so I thought this would be the first step. And so in doing this work, I looked at definitions according to academic literature and also non-academic literature by global institutions that have a strong mandate with regards to climate change and land use, notably agriculture and forestry. And so what I found is that there are various definitions, but there are some strong commonalities. Everyone wants deep change. And for example, the definition of IPCC does it very well. It says it is a shift in perception and meaning. So it's not just getting an impact. It's about changing people's perceptions, people's meanings, changes in underlying norms and values, reconfiguring social networks and patterns of interactions, changes in power structures, and the introduction of new institutional arrangements and regulatory frameworks. So this is very deep change that we're talking about. And also, importantly, it's moving away from the current path. There's some language being used as a shift away from business as usual, or to bend the natural arc of history. And there's a lot of emphasis on learning and on innovation. We cannot do this unless we learn from our successes and our mistakes. And we cannot do this if we are willing to admit to those things and then to share with others. And this is I think, the most difficult first step. Part of it is about promoting cutting-edge innovation, which I think a lot of us understand is important. But also, it's a way of changing how we think and understand our role in the problems that we are facing. Another is it's a sustained impact. You cannot just look at an impact, evaluate an impact after 3 years, after 5 years, after 10 years. The problems we are facing in climate change is huge. And the efforts that are needed has to be sustained for longer terms. So, which means, how are we going to finance that? How are donors and governments are going to sustain efforts across political cycles, across replenishment cycles of financing institutions? And so these definitions have the following common features. They're moving away from the current way of doing things. They're sustaining changes, and they're focusing on root causes and on the relationships that exist right now. And it has a lot of emphasis on knowledge and on innovation and on taking a lot of risk and being flexible. And now I would like to look at other highlights. What I find is that global institutions don't explicitly highlight the importance of linking between levels. So linking action at the global level with action at the national, with action at the subnational, and with action at the community level. So they are thinking at the global level how to scale up things. And then vice versa, at the community level, we have a lot of very strong opinions that everything must start from the bottom. And then it should be a bottom-up approach. Now, the literature says it has to be both. Everyone has to be interlinked. One level is as important as another, and the interactions between them are affecting each other. So it's an evolution across the different levels. And another thing that the literature is warning us is that sometimes we want to do things fast, and we want to do things big, and we want to do things meaningfully deep. But these three things is really hard to do simultaneously. We can do two, maybe. Maybe achieve depth and scale, but not speed. Or speed, but scale, but not depth. So these are the kinds of things that we have to agree upon. What does transformational change mean? Which one of these three things are we, which one of the two out of the three are we going to choose? And so in agriculture, forestry, and in climate change, the discussion, the literature on transformational change has just started, but we can learn a lot from other themes, other research themes. So for example, in health, in education, business, in public administration, you can imagine so many companies have gone through transformations and transitions and mergers. Also, government institutions go through them globally. At one particular point, some government institution is going through some kind of transformation. So there's a lot of lessons learned out there. And also, for example, in the education and health, they have a really good literature base on understanding the human aspect of how individuals change, how individuals learn new things or adopt new health behaviors. And also, but they all say that the direction is bottom up and top down. There's no, these different levels of changes have to be linked to each other. Nevertheless, if we're talking about landscape, land uses, especially forestry and agriculture, and climate change, there are differences between those and education, health, business administration, and public administration. For example, we are talking about way longer periods of time. You know, we're talking about decades. Whereas in the education and especially in business management, there's a lot of changes that have to be pursued within a very short time in comparison to what we're talking about, a few years maybe. And also in agriculture, forestry, and climate change, there's much less human agency. There's a lot of things that are beyond our control. We are not the service providers. We are not the one capturing the carbon. I mean, our bodies constitute carbon, but most of the carbon capturing is not done by us. It's done by the trees, by the forest, by the soils. And so we are facilitating other entities to do climate change mitigation, for example. So it's much less human agency compared to providing better human health services or providing better educational experiences. And also, there's a lot of issues regarding land rights that other literature is not grappling as much as in the land use sector. So land rights and land tenure is a barrier to change that is not tackled in other places. And so there's a few unique things that means that the study of transformational change needs to also take place to cater for the needs of transformational change in land use and climate change. But there's a lot that we can learn from others. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nia. And I've, from working on this together with you, I think the human agency point is one of the ones that I've found to be most compelling and profound in the context of the work that's happening in the land sector. We see so much emphasis on interventions being undertaken around matters that in many ways are essentially out of our control. And so it does, I guess, raise the question in the context of the urgency of addressing climate change to be perhaps more emphasis on those things that we can control. Thanks very much for that. Our next speaker is from the Green Climate Fund. So Mark Dumas Johansson, the Green Climate Fund has been involved in this work as a close collaborator, because in the governing instrument of the Green Climate Fund, there's what's become known as the paradigm shift objective, and so the Green Climate Fund has as a part of its mandate to be supporting or promoting the paradigm shift to low carbon economy and climate resilience. And I know that internally the Green Climate Fund is working very hard to both understand this and to be ensuring that this is something that is worked into its frameworks and its monitoring and evaluation work. So, Mark, it would be great to hear from you on how the Green Climate Fund is going about approaching the topic of transformational change in the context of its paradigm shift objective.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, colleagues. First of all, for the opportunity to be here. This is my first ELF, so I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much. So this is really an important question, Steve. Really as we heard from Nia's presentation, transformational change is almost something different to all of us. But for us to ensure that what we promote in forest and land use and the other sectors is truly paradigm shifting, we are currently discussing at the Secretariat sector strategies that will help us identify what paradigm shift really is per sector and what the GCF can contribute to, with that saying that this is not something that we can do alone, but we need to do it, all of us in this room and outside. But perhaps before going into details with that, let me just go back to Steve's question. So, for us, it's first of all something very context specific. There's no one size fits all, of course, and it's also very different for all the different sectors that we cover. So today we will only talk about forestry, but basically for us it's also an opportunity for countries to rethink and redefine economic growth in a way that doesn't compromise forests, but rather think of forests as a key part to achieving that growth. Basically, what we would like to see is a decoupling from the production of agricultural goods from increased deforestation. And in particular here, the role of private sector within these goods and these commodities. As we've already heard before, there's a huge opportunity. What is needed for us, or what do we see as the three paradigm shifters mainly, is first of all, strong political will. Without strong political will, we can't do it. It's catalytic investments, which is where we mainly come in. And of course also very strategic planning, here being the REDD+ national strategy, the NDCs. And perhaps to link my first comment on the strategic sector guidance and the NDCs is really a key moment now, because next year countries will be submitting their second NDCs. And for each of the sectors that are relevant to them, we'll need to put in place very ambitious targets. We have heard it before, we have only 11 years left before the 2030 target of 1.5 degree. What is needed to get us there? What kind of targets and ambitions do we need to see in the NDCs? That would have a huge impact on the type of projects that we could support. So this is really a key moment to also identify what is the type of transformational change we need to see to get us there. So back to the sector strategy. So we are currently designing these across the whole Secretariat. For the forest and land use sector, this is mainly driven around four interventions across that are integrated approaches, you could say, which really first of all look at deforestation-free commodity supply chains, forest restoration, conservation, and scaling up REDD+ results-based payments, where we see that these are all interlinked, and there are many more, but these are the main avenues we see that can be further promoted. I know we're a bit short of time today, but I will be happy to discuss further offline. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. Just on the work that the Green Climate Fund is doing around private sector, I understand that there was a slide in an earlier session that I found really interesting. I think it was in the UN REDD session that was identifying the amount of companies that have made pledges and the very low number, I think it was 5 of those companies have actually sort of entered into some sort of an arrangement with the government in order to do that. And I think that this is something that's really very compelling as well, that's coming up in our research, especially in the experience that companies have when it comes to transformational change. You've got all these companies that are out there that are making these pledges to be doing all these things, but we're not seeing the internal changes that are happening within those companies to then be making sure that these things are actually happening. And so it would be really interesting to hear a bit from you, because I understand that you're currently developing a policy for private sector, and so it would be good to hear a bit of insight in terms of the way that that's developing.
Thank you, Steve. No, definitely. This is a key moment, as we heard already from several speakers, for some really excellent presentations. Thanks for that. That these zero deforestation commitments, huge potential, but as we already heard, from commitment to result, how do we get there? How do we track that result? How do we build the trust? How do we promote this demand and make that bridge between the company, the country, and the consumers? So within our scope of the deforestation-free commodity supply chains, we definitely want to look further into how to take these commitments, how to look further into them, and understand what are the financial instruments that we as a fund can put on the table. What is the most innovative way we can construct these financial instruments, being a blended finance and many others, to actually attract the companies, to help them de-risk this and to not be afraid to engage further. We really have a lot to learn on this. So like all of our work, we wish to really work through large communities of practice, meaning that we want to reach out to all stakeholders relevant, working on this to really learn from what are the ongoing studies, what are the knowledge platforms so far, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We want to build on the best practices and come in where we can make that catalytic further investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so our next speaker is I guess what we could call my counterpart at the FAO. So Malgorzata Busco-Briggs. Malgo's the Red Plus program coordinator in the Forestry Department at the FAO. We've been now working closely on this project for the last couple of years. We've held a number of expert meetings where we've had scientists and indigenous groups and civil society and government and private sector and different representatives come together to discuss this, and now we're moving into this deeper research phase. And Malgo's also been very closely involved with the research that's been underway this year too. So it'd be good to hear from you, Malgo, on the work that's been happening at the FAO and how you see there as being the potential to be achieving transformation within short timeframes in the context of the Paris Agreement and the below 2 or 1.5 degree targets that have been set.
Thanks, Steve. I'm very pleased to be here today. So thanks a lot for inviting me to the panel, and I'm also happy to share some of the views and contribute to this discussion and share some observations on transformational change that is necessary today. I want to start with sharing why this discussion is very important for FIO and what is our motivation behind. And I'd like to just point out 2 issues. First of all, we need to better understand those definitions, because when we talk about transformational change, it's all great. We all committed to deliver. We are aspiring to be delivering transformational shift. At the same time, there is a demand from donors to achieve transformational impact in the projects and programs we deliver. But, on a daily basis, this concept is kind of still elusive. Of course, as accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund, we are very committed to deliver a paradigm shift in transformational change through projects and programs we are working on with countries. But yet, I think there is a need to better and deeper understand what it means, what is the evidence, and how we can build knowledge base on these issues. Back to your question, I want to go to one illustrative example that relates to landscapes and food nexus. According to FIO State and Food Security and Nutrition Report 2018, hunger is on the rise. And I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but we have 821 million people of undernourished. This is 1 in 9. This trend has reversed 3 years ago, and it is returning to a level from almost a decade ago. So those are bad news. At the same time, we need to meet growing food demand for over 9 billion people who will be at the planet by 2050, and we also need to meet the expected dietary changes. So agriculture will need to produce 60% more food globally in the same period. Yeah, just imagine how huge impact this may have on landscapes, forests, and all land uses. On the other hand, also I'll quote here another FIO report, about 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption is either lost or wasted every year. So it's not only a missed opportunity towards eradicating hunger, but also uneaten food is a major contributor to climate change, accounting for an estimated 8% of global GHG emissions. So I'm bringing this example because this is an example of a transformation that's needed, urgently. And by bringing this example, I want to put emphasis on 3 issues. The issue of scaling up, the issue of behavioral change that is needed, again, at scale, and the transformative partnerships. In FIO, we've been working with countries a lot on policies, implementation, institutional changes related to sustainable agriculture. And sustainable agriculture currently, I think it's needed more than ever. That is my one point. All we need to do now is to scale up. There are tools, there are practices, there are policies that exist, but we need to have a shift. And agriculture can and must be a significant part of the solution. My second point is on consumers' habits and behavioral change that is key to transformation and can also trigger a huge change that would impact landscape at scale and maybe in time, which you, Steve, were asking for earlier. And I also want to go back to what Mary Robinson said today at the opening session, that we need to take climate change personally. I think that is a very important message. And also what the mayor of Kyoto said this morning, and he said we need to pioneer mindset. So I think, in these transformational discussions, one issue is what we can do, but also the individual responsibility. And also maybe, in our work, we just need to work together more with behavioral and social scientists, in some kind of interdisciplinary manner to better understand on how we can make this transformative impact. One more example from FIO's work, and that relates to technological innovations. I think it has been already mentioned by one of the speakers, one of the previous speakers. Access to data and information thanks to the use of cutting-edge technologies. We work a lot in FIO with countries and different agencies and various partners. I think it has been a game changer, and I think these technological innovations really allow for cost effectiveness in data provision, and I think that's, I could elaborate on this a bit more, but I think for the sake of time, I'll stop here.
Did you have any comments on, because we have been working now on this for a while, and we are moving into this, this deeper research space. Did you have anything that you wanted to add in terms of the direction of travel, in terms of further research needs that we should be looking at with this work?
Yes, definitely. First of all, thanks, Nia, for presenting, lessons learned from the research, and also from other sectors, health and education, public administration, institutional transformations, which are very, very, very interesting, and we can learn a lot. I think that from the perspective of the future research needs on transformational change, I want to make 4 points. Point number 1 is related to methodologies and measuring transformational change. How do we know when this occurs? How can we attribute it to our work? What are the tools, measuring or evaluation tools that are available to help us track this change? That's number 1. Number 2 is attributing to our work. As I said, it's very relevant for anyone who has hands-on in the field and who wants to understand, how those different bottom-up approaches, which also Nia talked about earlier today, can be attributed and aggregated, to a high-level results. My third point is on building evidence base. I think we need really more good case studies, and cases and understanding, how this works and how does it work at national level, local level, or any level. And point number 4 relates to sharing knowledge and building broader understanding amongst various stakeholders and at all levels. Not only a global discussion, which is great to kick it off, but also, to share this with national and local level, where I think the transformation concept, it's still pretty vague. So I think these are my 4 points, and I think anyone who would like to join us in discussing how to take this agenda further, you're welcome to contact Steve or me offline after this session. Thanks.
Great, thanks. And yeah, we are thinking at the moment about how to begin to sort of open this space up more in terms of the collaboration and start to be working more closely with other organisations in moving this conversation forward. So I think that there's some really interesting work to be done ahead, and I'm quite excited by it. So moving on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Peter Riggs, who is the convener of the Climate, Land, Ambition and Rights Alliance, which some of you would know as the CLARA Alliance. It's the world's largest coalition of civil society organisations that are working within the climate negotiations amongst other spaces, with a major focus on human rights-based approaches to climate. And CLARA released a report around the same time as the IPCC 1.5 report that put a great deal of emphasis on rights-based approaches and human rights and biodiversity and other areas as major pathways towards climate action. And so, Peter, would you be able to perhaps tell us a bit more about that report and the role of human rights-based approaches and securing rights for communities and Indigenous peoples in achieving transformational change?
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Could I get the presentation slide up, please?
Yeah, we scale up here to a slide.
Right. When we talk about
supposedly, hopefully,
transformation, it's also possible to be quantitative in talking about that transformation. There it is. So yes, from CLARA, the Climate, Land, Ambition and Rights Alliance. The report is available on our website, and it would be great if you would take a look at it. Essentially what we did is we looked at transformational approaches in 3 areas, each of which is underlain by rights-based approaches. One is in agriculture, and essentially these is a set of solutions that Margot briefly described. Agriculture will never be a net sink, but it's possible to greatly reduce the carbon intensity, carbon impacts of agriculture. Currently, as we know, forestry is a net source of emissions rather than net sink, but there's a lot of potential for improvements in forest management, and in particular reforestation, which is allowing degraded landscapes to return to natural forests, not the conversion to plantations, but rather the restoration of ecosystem function and ecosystem integrity. But I draw your attention now to this graph on, what would it be, your right, which is the amount of carbon that's currently stored in forests and soils on community-held lands. That is, places where the rights of communities have been secured or are still to be secured, and this is a very important activity. We would argue that the single most consequential action, climate action, that can be taken is improving the land tenure and resource rights security of communities in forests, in coastal ecosystems, and in grasslands. And I would like very much to associate myself with the comments made this morning by Emanuela, who gave us a very nice roadmap to thinking about rights in that context. So if you look at what we could do in agriculture and land use, we're talking about gigatons of impact. But if we're looking at the current endowments, which are under community management, carbon endowments, land endowments, which are in lands which are secure or not secure. In fact, a big chunk of these lands are currently under threat. They're under threat in the Congo Basin, they're under threat in Indonesia, they're under threat in Brazil, but not only in the tropics, one of the areas with the fastest rates of forest degradation, again, not to say deforestation, but degradation, and therefore the removal of carbon from an existing forested area right now, is in the southeast United States. And the main driver for that, actually the biggest new driver of deforestation and forest degradation, is demand for wood pellets for use in coal conversions in power plants. That is bioenergy, which is absolutely a false solution. We'll be hearing more about that in the next panel. But I think the main point I want to make here is transformation can also be, in addition to the positive trends we talk about, transformation can be ending the negative trends we have seen, and the negative trends in this case being the conversion of natural ecosystems, in particular forested ecosystems, to monoculture plantations, pasture, other things which are to produce commodities, and rather than an improvement in management techniques which would allow these commodities to be produced within the existing footprint, and maybe even to shrink that down some, as we heard some good examples from Rio in the previous session. This would be a case where we absolutely, using a rights-based approach, need to protect the 1,000 gigatons of CO2 equivalent that are currently found in community-managed lands. Let's strengthen land rights. Let's raise the profile of land tenure as a climate solution. That is the positive transformation that's needed. The co-benefits from doing so are higher than almost anything else you can do. It reduces social conflict. It reduces the potential for violent conflict, and is our best guarantee of food security, the right to food also being a very important right that needs to be safeguarded in this approach. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Peter. I think it's a really interesting approach. One of the reasons, again, going back to this human agency point, if you think about rights and tenure, or tenure specifically, essentially it's a human it's a human construct, and so again it's something that is very much in the control of people. It's something that can be done through policy and law reform, and it's something that is possibly within our grasp to actually achieve. So I think that's something that would be really interesting to continue to explore with this work going forward. So moving on to our final speaker, who is Dr. Makino Yamanoshita from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies here in Japan, which is an institute attached to the Ministry of Environment, I believe, here. And you've been involved in a lot of work around REDD+ and research concerning communities. It would be great to hear from you. We've heard a bit today about the importance of communities and sort of bottom-up, top-down sort of type approaches. It would be good to hear a bit from you in terms of what you have seen occurring in a REDD+ context, and what REDD+ has done to date in order to be contributing to achieving change at a community level that could perhaps be considered transformational.
Yes, Steve. Today I'd like to talk about the importance of capacity or capability, considering the capability of local communities when we develop the forest carbon project. Fortunately, I have no experience working in a REDD+ project, but before that, I've been working with the community for the forest carbon in Vietnam through the afforestation, reforestation activity. And not surprisingly, the story about carbon was too difficult for the local community, and they couldn't understand the mechanism, how they can generate the credit. For example, one day farmer came to me and asked me where the car to collect the carbon come to the village. And they believe that the carbon will be vacuumed through the soil one day, and they can sell to the market, and that's why they can get the additional market. So this is one example, and also this is not surprising that after several years project ended, I found that some forests are maintained, but some plots are converted to the land use which used to be, such as shifting cultivation or grazing. And I was really interested in why the people cannot maintain the forest, because from the perspective of climate change, the permanence or the sustainability of the project or forest is very important, because we have to keep the carbon in the forest for a long time. And I found that to keep the forest for a long time requires the various kinds of capability of local communities, not only skills in the forestry technique. You need to have information to access the market and know the value of your forest as a timber, or you need to understand how income will change during if you convert the land. And you need to know how to work collectively with the local community, or the village needs to have a land use plan. And understand the situation that the tree plantation in the project I was involved, the tree plantation was just a temporary option for the local community to join the activity of planting, because the project provides the seedlings or technique. But and to make the tree plantation to be a real option for the local community, we need more we need more development, we need more effort to develop the local community. And after that, they can select their own land use, depends on their value in their life. And based on this experience, I like to say that the capability development of local community is crucial for transformational change in land use. But how can a large-scale REDD+ initiative integrate this kind of top-down policy approach and bottom-up community-based approach? Nia already mentioned that we need both approaches, maybe, and but currently, as there was a discussion in the morning that the REDD+ is implemented at the jurisdictional level, which with the policy approach mainly, and considering the scale required for the 1.5-degree target and large-scale implementation is necessary, it makes sense. And to reform forest governance and implement new policy, jurisdictional level is adequate, I think. But even when REDD+ bring about the new policy, without capability development, local community cannot fully use the opportunity without adequate support. That means intended transformational change will never occur. So I think, and also recently the data shows that about 30% of deforestation area has been converted to the local agricultural land. And the root cause behind is poverty. So we have to incorporate somehow, I have no concrete idea at the moment, but we have to incorporate the human development perspective into the large-scale intervention is crucial to achieve the transformational change.
Thank you. Okay, so that's our panelists. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists on any of the topics that have been raised? I've noticed in the earlier sessions there hasn't been very much coming from the floor in terms of interaction and questions. So surely there has to be some questions that people must have on some of the topics that are being raised here. Again, wow. Yes, up here, and there's two up here at the front. Do we have a roaming microphone by any chance, or is that not available? Perhaps just yell, Peg.
Okay, I'm wondering who's asking communities at the grassroots what they think transformational change is.
Yep.
And in fact, if that's happening.
So the question for those who are down the back who wouldn't have heard that is, in this particular process, do you mean, Peg? So who's asking the communities at the ground what they think transformational change is? So is the question. So perhaps we'll take one more question, and then the panel can respond. There may be one other. So.
I agree on your idea. So I think the land right is the sole solution to mitigate the global warming. But I want to ask you the base of calculation. You show the data, carbon reduction, but you don't show the base of the calculation. Thank you very much.
Hello. Okay, so thanks. Was maybe one more if there are any others? No? Okay, so maybe because the second question was directly to you, Peter, so maybe you can take that one, and then we can discuss the other question. So go ahead, Peter.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And Stephen didn't allow me to show our work because it would take too long to do that. So again, I refer to the slide. But particularly with respect to the carbon endowments in community-managed lands, this has primarily come from the work of two organizations. One is Rights and Resources International. Some of you may be familiar with Rights and Resources, an excellent organization which is asking that bottom-up question of what communities want in terms of tenure systems and resource rights. They have been working very closely with Woods Hole Research Center in the United States to do this kind of carbon mapping, and I'm not going to steal from their publication, but sometime in the third quarter of this year, we expect to see a peer-reviewed paper which actually will walk through this and relate the areas of secure land tenure at the community level to the carbon endowments in tropical, temperate, and boreal forest systems. Just a brief note on that first question. The members of CLARA, the Climate, Land, Ambition, and Rights Alliance, are asking this question of communities, and in many cases, our members are indigenous groups and community groups which have come together to make these kinds of requests. And they're trying to find the appropriate venues in which to put forward this message of land rights. Clara just submitted a dozen proposals for the Climate Action Summit in New York in September. More than half of those submissions deal specifically with methodologies for securing land rights and noting the food security benefits and livelihood benefits and biodiversity benefits that come from secure land tenure systems. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Perhaps, Malgo, did you want to address the question in terms of the, I guess, maybe not only communities, maybe communities, but also the broad range of stakeholders that have been involved in the work so far?
I think perhaps I could say just a few words about how we continue, how we're planning to continue this work, which was sort of, launched today at this event. But maybe some other colleagues, panelists, would like to really respond on specifically community sort of level, and the discussion on what's the understanding of transformational change. But what we're planning to do, FIO and C4 in partnership, we want to develop the next phase of this project and actually work with some countries and engage in a discussion at the national or even, kind of a subnational scale to engage in more sort of conceptual discussions, but also to look for evidence, to build, the knowledge base and evidence base. So this is the work that it's upcoming. I don't have much more to add at this junction, but maybe some other colleagues would like to refer to community level.
Nia?
I think that that question of who's asking communities what they think is absolutely crucial, because it's not supposed the whole point is that at different levels, everyone should be asking everyone else. And the vision of what is transformational change that we want has to be decided together. And at this point, it's still very much institutional. Like, what is this institutional, is this institutional thinking? What is that institution thinking? But something that's negotiated by different levels has not been put up yet. So this is something that needs to happen. And it needs to happen involving communities or community representatives. It needs to happen with global institutions. It needs to happen with subnational governments and with national governments also. Thank you.
Thanks, Nia. And I'll just add to that. In the with this work, we have had three expert meetings that we held, and in those meetings we have tried to ensure that there's a diverse range of stakeholders. We've had representatives from Indigenous networks who are working as the participating observers to the Green Climate Fund. We've had civil society representatives who are also participating observers to the Green Climate Fund. We've had private sector involved. We've had some governments involved. So we've been trying to make sure that we are opening a discussion across a broad range of stakeholders, because this is one of the lessons that we're learning from the research. It would be, I guess, we do need to be making sure that we are implementing what we're finding from the research. So are there any more questions before we finish up? We're running out of time very quickly, and the day is running a little bit over time as well. But if there is one more question, I think we can probably squeeze another one in. Nope. Okay. So thanks very much. I think it's been a good panel. We've heard from I think starting off with Nia at the top, talking about the research that's being undertaken, definitions. I think one of the things that stands out there is that the definitions are showing us that understanding what transformational change is a move away from the norm, a move away from business as usual, and to be also addressing the current power dynamics. Someone said to me at the very early stages of this work that a good example of transformational change would be to be moving from unsustainable development to sustainable development, which is very simple when you think about it, but it's also very true. And it was, I think, very useful to hear from Mark in terms of the work that is happening at the Green Climate Fund and the work towards the development of the sectoral strategies. And I'm hoping that a number of us that are involved in this work can contribute to that work going forward. And I think Margot putting emphasis on matters such as the broad range of stakeholders to be a part of the process, and emphasis on monitoring and evaluation, I think are also very important. And then hearing from Peter and Makino, which I think really brought out the emphasis on rights-based approaches and really focusing in a bit more as we go forward on bottom-up approaches and fully participatory processes with communities involved and strengthening rights out there in the communities. So at this point, I'll thank all of the panel members, and it's been lovely to be here with you as an audience, and thank you.